Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag. We're going to be talking poetry, among other things, for the next hour or so. So I have a poetry bag here with a quote from W.B. Yeats. Take, if you must, this little bag of dreams. We'll be talking about little bags of something for the next hour, possibly not dreams. And I should also warn you, this is probably going to be a sweary one. Well, it will have to be a sweary one. All will be revealed when I tell you the name of the book that we are talking about. But let's get on. Let's interview the next guest in the book bag. Let's invite him in. He is Mr. Martin Rowson. Martin, welcome into the book bag.
Thank you very much, Suzi. And a very large and commodious bag it is too.
It is. I widened it especially for you because I knew you would have an amazing artwork in the background. Would you just like to tell us a little bit about what's going on behind your shoulder?
Yeah, this thing here is Hogarth's Roundabout. And it was commissioned by the BBC in 1997 to mark Hogarth's tercentenary. And Hogarth is, of course, the grandfather of my trade as a political cartoonist.
Yeah.
And they were making a film and they wanted to have this nice piece of artwork, you know, with me drawing it. They filmed me drawing it. And then they changed producers halfway through the production, as they always do. And they dumped the drawing. They just had me as a talking head. And so I said, can I have the drawing back? And they said, no, you can't have the drawing back. And I said, why not? I said, have you read the contract? And of course, I'm a freelance cartoonist. I didn't read the bloody contract. I'd rather people do that for me. Like the people who you know, give me the contracts in the first place. And of course, anyone out there who's familiar with a BBC freelance contract, it does contain the rather intimidating clause that everything you do for the corporation will be owned by them in all media existing or yet to be invented throughout the known and unknown universe. So you do
stuffed.
You do a sort of 5-minute down the line to Good Morning Bogshire on BBC Radio Bogshire, and in 100 million years' time there'll be a ball of sentient gas somewhere beyond Alpha Centauri, and the BBC will own it. So I said, what are you going to do with it? And they said, well, we'll put it in storage. I had an image of that scene from the last the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. They've been trundled into this enormous aircraft hangar filled with things like Jimmy Savile's old tracksuits and Tommy Trinder's teeth and things like that. And so I paid them the commission fee back and had to buy it back off them.
Wow.
And this is a blow-up version, which was on a mezzanine level in the National Theatre for an exhibition celebrating Hogarth's 300th birthday. And the original, I'm happy to say, is in the Cartoon Museum. And a print of it is in Hogarth's house in Chiswick, between some original Hogarth prints, Jonian Hogarth prints. It has been reported to me that people go from a scene from Marriage à la Mode or the Harlot's Progress or whatever, and then look at my print, and then move on to the next, and then sort of double take and think, yeah, they didn't have cars when Hogarth was alive, did they?
Absolutely brilliant. Well, the book that we're talking about is going to be mingling the centuries in a similar fashion. I mean, you mentioned 1997. We have known each other for a very long time. We've known each other so long that I used to trot round to your house to pick up the week's cartoon in person. Presumably because we didn't have scanners back then. You know, you had a long curly wig, you know, a periwig and I used to come in my carriage, obviously.
Yeah, and then I remember I would drop round, having dropped my children off at school, in my sedan chair and unscroll the parchment and take it off, and it would be put to stone.
Yes. Oh, those were the days. So just to explain, it was when I was at the Independent on Sunday, and we had a weekly cartoon by Martin. I mean, it preceded me and it came after me. I wasn't responsible, but I mean, it was a wonderful thing to, you were a wonderful person to inherit, shall I say. And we had many conversations over the phone. What do you know about this, Mart? There's this book coming out. Do you know anything about, George Eliot? and you would come back with
Never heard of the
something.
bloke, you know.
You'd come back with something brilliant. So I do have a little collection of Rowsoniana. I'll briefly show. This is one of my favourite things of yours. Rather astonishingly, well, that's T.S. Eliot showing a foxy dame fearing a handful of dust. It's this sort of what do they call it? A kind of private eye version of The Wasteland.
Yeah, it's the Wasteland retold as a Chandleresque film noir.
Exactly.
Which the Eliot estate tried to suppress by any means available to them. Which they failed to do, thankfully. But I wasn't allowed to quote any of the quotations Eliot quoted because they were covered by compilation copyright. So
even though he was quoting them.
Yeah, he pillaged 3,000 years of world literacy, and I wasn't allowed to quote any of that. And they got terribly cross. Of course, it was when Valerie Elliott was still alive, and she was a very, very, very jealous defender of the flame of Tom's reputation. I think he'd have quite enjoyed it myself, but
people
prancing, liked it.
People prancing around in leotards in the West End was absolutely fine.
Yeah, furry.
Terrible songs. All fine. I've got your memoir stuff, which is wonderful. You have an incredible memory for detail. I remember telling you at the time, you don't really remember it like the wallpaper on the, the place you once stayed in Blackpool as a 10-year-old. And, well, I guess you're very visual, and you would sort of go, but I do. I do.
It's quite disturbing, actually.
Yes.
It's disturbing when I misremember things, because I think I've got which I know I have a very good visual memory, obviously. It helps because I do drawings and stuff. But it's when you go somewhere, which you went to in childhood, and you have a crystal... We went to Helsinki, my wife and I went to Helsinki about 10 years ago, and I'd last been there when I was 9. It was the last family holiday we had before my mother died when I was 10. So it's probably the reason why I remember it so well. And I remember us walking round the quayside in Helsinki, which it's got cobbles on it in a very particular pattern. And there's a clover leaf tram exchange. And clear memories of this, and a clear memory of the vista going up to the Lutheran Cathedral, this big blue and white Lutheran Cathedral at the end of this vast piazza. And of course, when we went back there was a row of houses between the seafront and the cathedral that had clearly been there for 200 years. and I was trying to work out why this was, but the author Louisa Young, my friend Louisa Young, said it's called remembering. It's the same kind of thing as dismembering. There are lots of different factors in your head, and you put them together, and sometimes you don't quite put them together properly. So I thought it was
marvelous.
It wasn't incipient Alzheimer's, which is good.
Well, that is good. That is good. When did you start cartooning? I mean, were you, even at this sort of age, 10 or whatever, scribbling away, getting little, I mean, it's very hard to get something you have to do as a cartoonist. You've got to be able to draw a face so people go, that's, Peter Mandelson or whoever.
Yeah.
Like getting a likeness is so important. Was this something you could do from an early age?
Apparently so. Yeah, but I don't understand how it works. I mean, I genuinely don't understand what it is. I remember when Theresa May became Prime Minister, and I had a terrible dark weekend of the soul, because I was drawing her for an illustration for Kevin Maguire's column in the Daily Mirror, which I used to do, and it didn't look like her. I mean, it looked like her, but not enough like her for my satisfaction. And it's a sort of weird kind of occult magic. You know when it's right. You know when it looks more like them than they do. There's a phrase I'm very fond of using quickly on live TV. You have your hand up their soul. As I said, when you've caught somebody, and it is capturing. It's like capturing them in a photograph or in a spell. Or something like that. It is sympathetic magic. And as I said, you know when you have your hand up their soul, and it looks more like them than they do. And in Theresa May's case, it didn't look like her until I dropped her eye fractionally down her face. And there it was.
And that was it.
And I thought, how the fuck does that work? I genuinely don't know. And we'll have to wait for the autopsy, you know.
You must have had a terrible time when we had all those prime ministers. I mean, I suppose as soon as somebody new comes on the scene, you think, oh, I've got to, you know, Nick Clegg or something. I've got to somehow get him.
Well, Nick Clegg I couldn't draw at all until I saw him moving in the first of the leaders' debates in 2010. And I saw he had a sort of noddy head like that. And I thought, well, either you're Private Pike from Dad's Army or you're Pinocchio. And so I drew him as Pinocchio with Vince Cable rattling him, saying, the fairy's promises come true. You are a real politician. You know, the little wooden boy became a real politician, and the punters got it straight away. So I spent 5 joyous years having the deputy prime minister as a little wooden boy who wanted to be a real politician, and just being dismantled by the Tories and turned into deck chairs and clubs and things like that. At one point, he was reduced to sawdust, and they put him back together again as a sort of MDF, or whatever you call it. It's,
joy, sheer joy.
I mean, the one thing we've all got a lot to blame Liz Truss for, but I would blame her for just chickening out too soon, because I just got her. None of my colleagues had quite got the essence of Liz Truss, which was her nose is like a little sharp chisel, actually, like that. And I just got her, and then she buggered off, which was really annoying.
So inconsiderate.
But last year, I did an Edinburgh show where I was talking about the 9 prime ministers I've drawn in anger, and the long version of it, I actually then depict them in various foodstuffs, or anything that comes to hand. Blair was depicted in horse blood, actually, because I had to have some horse blood lying around the place, as you do. But I was very pleased with my depiction of Liz Truss, because she was not a Marmite politician. She was a Bovril politician. So everybody hates her. And so I sort of painted her in Bovril and then did her hair. I just thought, what is the most appallingly disgusting, vile foodstuff, which everybody has agreed is an atrocity, is a crime against humanity. And of course, it is Heinz sandwich spread. So the outline was in Bovril, hair in sandwich spread.
I think you must have been a cartoonist at Time Out when I was there, because this directly links to the book we're going to talk to. I remember the then editor Dominic Wells coming into the subs desk and going, I've had a word with Martin Rowson. I've told him to cut the crap. And I think your weekly cartoon for Time Out always had a little pile of orgia somewhere, or maybe much of it.
Yeah, this was the mid-90s, and I was, and it was the major government who were up shit creek without a paddle. And I said to him, Dominic, I take your point, but we're meant to be a bit sort of out there, a bit left field on Time Out. And if you can think of a better visual metaphor for this government, please tell me what it is. To which he replied, good point, good point.
Well, he was always so diplomatic. And if you can't have piles and piles of crap in Time Out magazine, frankly, where can you? And then, so we're going to go on to...
others have done, they then sacked me. So, I think I've been sacked about 46 times, I've worked out last year.
Yeah. And still doing pictures of shit. Okay, so... So the reason I warned people at the beginning that this we're not going to be talking about little bags of dreams, and it might be a bit sweary, is we're talking about this book. I sort of have to take a bit of issue with the way it's written, and maybe the entire concept. So it's called The Dunciad.
It is.
Expand. Expand.
Well, I have, for the last 12 or 13 years, had a very fulfilling relationship with Andy Croft of Smokestack Books. I always like to say the Northeast's premier Marxist-Leninist poetry imprint. And Andy'd been doing it for 20 years, and he's just issued his final list. And I'm on it. He wanted me on it, which was very nice of him. And we started off our relationship. Actually, you were directly involved with this, because one of the features I did for The Independent on Sunday books pages was the Limerickyiad, which I think was a word you coined, which was retelling the whole of world literature in limerick form. And then you moved on, and then they suddenly noticed that I was the last freelancer working for the paper, and they sacked me halfway through Ibsen. So, which was a bit, but I finished. Limerickyiad Volume 4 got up to the end of the First World War, and Andy said, "Yeah, do Limerickyiad Volume 5," and I said, "Yeah, okay." And it took me about 6 months to realise that the joke was over. That I couldn't do this. I just, the idea of spending months trying to do some limericks about Iris Murdoch was just too much for me to bear. And then Andy said, "Oh, I remember. Yeah, a few years ago, I wanted you to illustrate the Dunciad." I said, "What?" "Oh, yes. You wanted to do a book called the Dunciad, didn't you?" Yes, yeah, do that, write that." I said, "Are you sure about the title? I mean, do you not think we ought to think of a different title?" He said, No, call it the Dunciad. So it's his idea, not mine. And then Amazon made it quite clear that they weren't going to list it if it was actually called that, so it has an asterisk. And I was recently told by the BBC's Front Row that they were quite interested in the book, but they felt they couldn't quite do it because they couldn't say what it was if they used the asterisk, because it's radio, and they couldn't say it without the asterisk because it's obscene and deeply offensive. And there are several sections in the poem which is over 2,000 lines of heroic couplets, where this issue is discussed, not least of all by
a dog,
by the ghost of Alexander Pope's Great Dane Bounce, who then has a dispute with the ghost of Hogarth's pug dog, Trump. And Hogarth did have a pug dog called Trump, and it was called Trump because that was the noise it made when it farted.
So this is perfectly suited to what we may call your excremental vision. And Dunciad is actually a pun on Dunciad.
Yes.
Alexander Pope. I mean, he was Catholic, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't rise to those heights exactly. I mean, it's very funny. The Dunciad is a mock epic by Alexander Pope. So, viz. The Aeneid, and you take Aeneas out of it and put dunce in, henceforth, the Dunciad. Now, the only trouble with this, Martin Rowson, I put to you, is that not many people have read the Dunciad.
No,
so,
but
saying Dunciad, are people going to go, "What are you on about?" Or do you not mind?
Given the fact that this book is not necessarily aimed at the Reader's Digest Book of the Month demographic, that, as you know, poetry sells minute amounts. Apparently this has sold quite well so far in poetry terms. So it sold about sort of 500-600 copies, I think. And I didn't think that was an issue. And I do say in the foreword that the original is unreadable, which in fact it is. And I think it was meant to be unreadable. If anybody watching or listening to this has ever dipped into it, you'll know that Pope had got into a kind of satire frenzy. He kept on piling on the jokes. And one of the jokes was to have a running criticism of the poem and its contents running at the bottom of each page in footnote form. So for a poem which is about 2,000 lines long, the book is actually pretty thick because most of it is footnotes, where he's making jokes about jokes about jokes about jokes, and it's sort of meta. And he's talking about people he hated, he genuinely hated. People, the dunces aren't our leaders necessarily, unless although he refers to King Dunce II, having just succeeded King Dunce I. But they're his fellow scribes, the poets. Like, I can never pronounce this man's name. Is it Colley Cibber?
Cibber, I think.
Yeah, Colley Cibber, who become poet laureate, who he thought was a complete dunce. He just thought he was, he was a devotee of the goddess dullness. And it was their mediocrity, because there was Pope, greatest poet of the age, forced to live more or less in internal exile in Twickenham, wasn't allowed to come into central London because he was a Catholic, never allowed to even think about the poet laureateship. And so these miserable, useless, talentless hacks are making hay and treating him with contempt. And he's described in revolting ways by people he thought were his friends because he had a spinal curvature as a result of childhood illness, unlucky in love, let's put it like that. And they said, oh, you're twisted like this because you're a poisonous man. You are a vile, poisonous man. And in fact, he was like, I think, Hogarth and Swift, in as much as in an age where it was a common occurrence to walk around a corner in London, stepping over the open sewers full of shit and dead cats and blood and guts, and see a child being publicly executed for stealing a bun. Most people just walked on by. Pope and Swift and Hogarth were actually quite shocked by that. They were actually sort of thinking. So as I said, of Hogarth, I said, the adjective Hogarthian. Here is a man called Hogarth walking down Hogarthian streets, who is himself not Hogarthian, because he isn't what he depicts. He depicts it because he is Hogarth, and he sees it as horrific. He sees civilization, the largest city the world had ever seen, filled with people living lives of abject misery and horror. And that was the satirical imperative, which, of course, feeds into the scatological image and the scatological muse, which informed Swift and Pope and Hogarth. Because, as I would say, this is the largest city the world had ever seen and had no flush toilets. So the things we don't talk about, because it's disgusting and upset Dominic, the editor of Time Out, so much, was an everyday reality, because you were literally wading through it in the streets whilst reading your vellum-bound copy of a latest translation of Juvenal's satires. And it would be vellum-bound, beautiful leather around it. And do you know how they softened the leather to bind it round the books? They rubbed it with dog shit, which old women and small children gathered off the streets in baskets by hand and took it round to the printing works, where they rubbed it into the leather to make it soft enough to bend round. And then they probably, as they're walking home, they go past a laundry where they were boiling the sheets in piss. That's how they live.
To bleach it? Or...
Yep.
Yeah. Right. So, the Dunciad. It's in 4 books.
Yep.
You've copied that format. Yours is in 4 books, as you've said. It's heroic couplets. I loved some of the rhyming. What did I found? Aldous Huxley rhymed with crazy fuckers we.
Crazy fucks we.
Oh yeah, I can't read my own handwriting, of course. Crazy fucks we, and KY Jelly and Machiavelli, just 2 of the gems that I found. So our heroic narrator, shall we say, finds himself in a boat. He has these aforementioned pups with him. He meets up with Alexander Pope, and outline the story.
Well, what
such as it is.
Yeah. It starts off with me opining about how I want to write an 18th century poem, but everything's changed. Of course, nothing's changed. The buildings have changed a bit, but the reality is we're still ruled by the same people as we ever were. And I then start describing the nation and go on a sort of peregrination around talking about Smithfield and the influence of the River Fleet, these things which informed the satirical imagination of 18th century London, and how the particulates coming from this open sewer stretch out across London. They stretch out everywhere, as far beyond Chertsey, where every time a courtier goes to curtsy, the King Dunce gags because he's inhaling all this Smithfield shit all the time, like the rest of us are. And then sort of dashing around the home counties, trying to get back to London, and caught at a roadworks in Twickenham just before dawn, I see the ghost of Alexander Pope and his dog Bounce, who is actually bigger than he is. And we then fall into conversation. We then find this boat and start travelling downriver. And as part of our journey downriver, looking at what's happening around us on the riverbanks. And I try to engage in a pact with Swift that he will tell me the secret of his satirical genius, and even offer him my soul, which I pull out of my ear, and it falls with a plop onto the deck of the boat. And then Hogarth's dog Trump bounces across the river, walks across the water, and jumps into the boat and eats my soul. So it's all getting pretty miserable and gloomy. And then we actually get into London. So there's a long description of how London is operated in, whose interests, until we see underneath Blackfriars Bridge an outlet from where the old River Fleet runs, because it's been buried under Farringdon Road for centuries now. And we managed to get in there, and inside is this vast underground cavern, shades of Xanadu and Kubla Khan, wherein there is this grand parade of the modern devotees of the goddess dullness. So it's not just the writers, it's everybody. It's the people who make the food that poisons us. It's the politicians, it's the lawyers, it's the writers, it's the journalists. It's everybody. And then suddenly the whole cavern starts collapsing because it's such a flimsy edifice, and then we escape, and that's the end of book 3. And we get out onto Farringdon Road, and we go to the old King Lud, which was a pub on Ludgate Circus, closed in 2005, which is now a ghost pub filled with all these ghosts from London across 2 millennia. And various conversations take place, and these ghosts...
Hogarth is there.
Hogarth's there. There's an Australopithecine there for some reason or other, who sort of has a few messages to say about the nature of humankind. Chunny the elephant, who lived in Exeter Change, where Charing Cross Station is now, and at this menagerie, lived upstairs, the first floor, this elephant, male bull elephant, and went into mush, as elephants do, and sort of got hormonally overexcited. And the owner of the menagerie charged people money to see Chunny being executed by firing squad, which didn't work, so they had to finish him off with a harpoon. This is one of the most disgusting moments in London's history, and was the direct inspiration for the establishment of the Zoological Society of London, with which I've been involved for many, many years. And anyway, you know, I'm looking around the pub, people come and go, they sort of evaporate, they reanimate themselves. And then I notice Pope looking out the window, and of course he's looking at the latest parade of the devotees of the great goddess dullness, because you just can't stop the bastards from running the world.
Well, then you have you do this 18th century thing of having dash.
Yeah.
But because it's all in rhyming couplets, it's fairly easy to...
Yeah, it's pretty obvious I'm talking about Michael McIntyre at one point.
That puzzled me for about 2 seconds, and then yeah, you look at the rhyme and like, yeah. So you must have had a lot of fun putting that together. I was just looking at the huge. What I love was the huge list. So it's in this pub, and it's the dead and dying trades.
Yeah.
Alchemists, lamplighters, crossing sweepers, muffin men, coal miners, mammoth keepers, scriveners, barbers, doublingers, bleeders, toshers, highwaymen, trade union leaders, beadles, mudlarks, 3-field farm agrarians, shorthand typists, projectionists, librarians, and on and on and on it goes.
On it goes.
I mean, how did there are little digressions along the way, and I imagine a great rhyme would lead you in an unexpected direction. It's a bit like, you know, Byron with Don Juan, where he just goes off. He's just found some great rhymes, so there's a digression.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote this over a period of about 9 months, and with moments of extreme productivity. It suddenly would be pouring out of me, because I suddenly find myself thinking in heroic couplets and sort of then dreaming in heroic couplets and dee-dum-dee-dum. It's a great rhyme structure, and then it's, you know, it's one of those things. Long form writing, I often find you think, God, how much longer have I got to do this? And then suddenly it's finished. you suddenly realise, oh, well, I've come to the end, and I've written several books, of some length, and you're there, and it's always a bit of a surprise. Unlike most people, I understand, when I'm doing a graphic novel, of which I've done several, I never plan it out. I never rough it out. I never decide what's going to happen next. I just work my way through. And with stuff, I just work my way through. I had a beginning, I had an end, and there was all the stuff in the middle, which I just needed to pad out. And I think this is because I've been debauched by journalism, that I'm used to short.
We all have.
Yeah,
we all have.
And it actually gets boring. So if you have to because our son Fred is a filmmaker, and he's always storyboarding everything. And
by the way, Martin is not my husband, and Fred is not our son.
No,
I just thought I'd make that clear. You're not in another room of my house.
No. If my wife Anna saw this and I said my son Fred, she would quite rightly say "oi." So I always
Gotcha.
But because I'm used to tight deadlines, if I'm given, I delivered this on time. I actually got it there on time. But if I'm given a long time to do something, I'll only do it at the last minute because it's boring. Actually, I get easily bored by having to slog away at things. Why submit roughs for cartoons? Because it means you have to draw it twice. I mean, So I never submit a rough to the Guardian. I tell them what I'm going to do. I explain the image in my head, and then I spend the rest of the day trying to get it out on a piece of paper. But it's going to be terrible for the Martin Rowson Memorial Library because there will be no preliminary notes. There'll be no preliminary sketches.
Well, the other thing about doing a rough is it just invites people to say, no, I don't want you to do it like that.
Well, exactly. And
I mean, when I had a column, if anybody said to me, what will it be about this week? I would only reply in very vague terms.
Yeah.
Because if you said it's about, the difference between Mars bars and, Snickers, or people go, oh, don't do that. Oh, no, so why bother?
And there are several cartoons over the decades which exist only in my head because I was foolish enough to tell some dim editor what I was planning to do, and they scotched it. And it's my favourite example of this. I knew the Guardian weren't going to take it, but in 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party on the 12th of September, and so I said, I pitched this idea, which was going to be the twin towers of Blair and Brown as these sort of hollowed out, dilapidated, crumbling towers, with Corbyn floating towards them like Mary Poppins, just called 912. I thought it was really funny. And I knew they'd say no, and they said no. But back then I had this stopgap, which was anything the Guardian rejected, which I really wanted to draw, I would then give to the Morning Star. So at least it would get out there. And I then put it on social media so people could see it. Anyway, the Star, the features desk, were terribly excited. The cartoon editor liked it. But then the new editor said, oh, I don't think we can do that. I don't think Jeremy's people would like it if we were associating him with terrorism. To which I replied, this is something I'm giving to you. I don't think you have a say in saying no. And also, he should have thought about that before he invited Hezbollah around for tea in the House of Commons. But there you go. So it exists just in my head.
There is a fine tradition of politicians who are pilloried by cartoonists saying, I want to buy that cartoon, and then they do something like put it in the downstairs loo. Have you had experience of such things?
I mean, it's an indication of the sort of dark shamanistic power of caricature, which I genuinely believe it's there. It's actually there as a form of sympathetic magic. That you draw pictures of people you want to destroy. You take their images, and what they do, I mean, you'd have to go to a Freudian to work out what it means when you hang a picture of yourself in your toilet, because it means this is the place you get rid of the bad magic. You get rid of the shit. So I'm just going to blow my nose because I'm suffering from a terrible cold at the moment. Hang on a minute. And
so you're not offended by that? Is it sort of a tribute?
Yeah. I mean, I've always typified the relationship between my profession and theirs is that it's mind over matter. They pretend they don't mind, and we pretend we matter. You know.
So, what does a working day look like, Shay Rowson? I mean, do you have is the time for drawing different to the time for writing? I sort of feel that maybe the light is somehow involved in this, your arcane trades.
The time for drawing is dictated by the time of the deadline, as you will be aware. And on The Guardian, since they stopped using their own presses, they're printed on the Daily Mirror's presses. And so they have to get in quite early. So I have quite tight early deadlines on The Guardian. So tomorrow I'll be doing Saturday's cartoon, and I'm not even thinking about it. And I won't think about it first thing tomorrow morning, because there's no point in me thinking about, oh, there's a wonderful news story, I can do a fantastic cartoon about that. And the news will change completely, as it does all the time. That's why it's called news, because it's new all the time. And so I'll listen to the headlines on Radio 3. Haven't listened to the Today programme for 30 years, and I feel a better person for it. I don't need their analysis. I just want the facts. Give me the facts. And I'll get the headlines, and you take one of the 3 headline stories, the one you think is going to still have legs the next day, it's still going to make sense. It'll then be published by the paper probably about 5 o'clock online tomorrow afternoon. And that's when it enters the world and enters whatever happens when things get published. You know, is then seen by potentially everybody who is currently alive or not. But you have no control over it after that. So what I'll be doing tomorrow, I don't know. I should imagine I'll probably try and sneak in something to do with Christmas, but it may not be appropriate. We just don't know.
Do you ever sort of think, you know, as the deadline, you know, hurries near, I haven't quite got it. A bit like not quite getting Theresa May's eyes right. I haven't quite got the joke. What is the joke? You know? Sometimes
there is, because it's seat of your pants stuff, you know, it takes about 5 hours to do finished artwork, really complex finished artwork, which I want to look as beautiful by my lights as I can. I don't want to just do a stick drawing. So I try to make it satisfying for me to look at, and then hopefully it will be satisfying for other people to look at. And quite often you just write up to the end of it, oh no, this is all completely wrong, but I haven't got any time to do it. And the ones I think, oh god, that doesn't work, are quite often the ones everybody really likes. So, which is annoying, but it's a peculiar skill which very few people have, because you have to do it so quickly. And the people are genuinely amazed that I can produce art, and I can't do it on computers because I'm an old-fashioned limner, as we used to say, if you remember, where I'm using the same technology they used to paint the Chauvet cave system. And but
you were always the great cross-hatcher. That's what I remember. So, I mean, your work is always elaborate, and you're a modern Hogarth in that sense. That, you know, they have this. The Dunciad also has their collages.
They're sort of Age of Enlightenment Cold War Steves, I think. I'm a big fan of Cold War Steve. And I thought, well, I could draw these, but actually no, let's do some collages. And when I sent these in, the aforementioned Andy Croft said, these are great. Yeah, it's like, you know, the poem's just captions to these fantastic pictures. 9 months down the shitter there, you know.
But like I say, you know, the other amazing book is Tristram Shandy, the unfilmable, but it has been filmed, and ungraphic novelable, but you have graphic novelabled it, and Gulliver's Travels, and they are very. I mean, that's a slightly different thing when you're working for a book rather than a deadline. But, you know, your cartoons for The Independent on Sunday, you know, they were beautifully painted, often encrusted with kind of whiteout because your spelling possibly remains a little bit.
Hey, I'm a pictures guy. What do I care about words?
Exactly. I mean, sometimes it would come in and the subs would go, oh, God, you know, there's an apostrophe in the wrong place or whatever. But yeah, they were always beautifully painted. And you always seem to have done them in a very brief window between something for, you know, the Mirror or something. And the other thing I remember about you writing for the Independent on Sunday was we could never give you a pay rise because nobody could figure out how you were paid.
Yeah,
you were paid.
I was paid. Well, I always like to think of it as it was a sort of elaborate and complicated machine which nobody knew how it worked, and it was sitting in a shoebox at the bottom of a filing cabinet in the basement of a building they'd moved away from 5 years ago.
Yes.
And it was ticking away, and in fact it carried on ticking away until I was the last freelancer left, and then they realised I was still there and sacked me.
Yeah, I had to pretend that. I just never brought up the subject, and we never had managing editors for long enough to really figure it out. A couple of times they sort of circled like sharks and wanted to know what was going on, and then they'd move on, so it'd be fine. We'd get another person in who didn't know anything. Yeah. So
well, I didn't mind. I thought 200 quid a pop was fine, and it kept going for, I think it was 23 years I was there, something like that.
Yeah,
it was a long time.
And then we would go for these, I would sort of take you out for sort of lunches and Christmas. I mean, the famous Christmas lunch was when I had to pretend I'd take the entire arts desk out for lunch.
Because the booze bill was so high, yeah.
I think I'd handed you the wine list, which is not a mistake I ever made with anybody else. But, you know, I just thought, yeah, Martin can have what he wants. So, yeah, it was an insane booze bill and a few fragments of food, as from what I recall. Yeah. So yeah, those were definitely the days. But you've done a lot of journalism. You've done a lot of written journalism as put together in this new book. Now, are these books out now, or
they are both published this month? Yeah.
So we are Christmas 2024. So there they are. But yeah, this is sort of collected journalism and other bits and bobs, isn't it? 1986 to 2024. How much material did you have to I mean, it's a whopper, but were you cutting down quite a lot of material?
Well, originally what I wanted was to collect together the columns I wrote for Tribune between 1997 and 2017, when Tribune was taken over by Jacobin magazine in New York as a kind of trot trophy, and they sacked all the people who worked for Tribune hitherto, including me as a cartoonist and a writer, and that was the end of that. And Tribune, as far as I can tell, has just sort of disappeared because they just got it as a trophy to present to Jeremy. God knows why. Anyway, the plans to revive it, but that's another story. But I thought, it's called As I Please because that was the name of the column which George Orwell used to write in Tribune. And at Tribune fundraisers, they'd always be auctioning off Orwell's stapler. Standard joke that, special auction prize would be Orwell's stapler. And this was regularly bought by somebody, and then they'd nip round to Ryman's and buy another one.
I was just going to say, it's like fragments of the True Cross. Exactly, very similar idea.
Exactly. And I shared this column. I used to write once a month. I shared the column with, amongst others, Joan Smith, Nick Cohen, Kevin Maguire. And, I thought these. I wrote a lot of good stuff in there, and I thought it's a shame they'll just disappear completely. So I pitched the idea to my very good friend, Naveen Kishore at Seagull Books in Calcutta, who I've got another of these nice long-term relationships with somebody, where for at least the last 12 years, I've produced a kind of silent graphic short story for their catalogue, which is a beautiful thing. They have a wonderful business plan whereby Naveen comes to America and Europe once a year in a kind of grand tour, and he goes and sees the people running the estates of great names in literature and says, we will republish this early novella by, I don't know, Thomas Mann, maybe not Thomas Mann, but, name some famous American author. Go on. This is
Hemingway?
Yeah, Hemingway. Somebody who is still in copyright. And he said, I'll republish that because it's been out of print for 50 years, and I'll give you $1,000 world rights. And they said, that's lovely. Yeah, because we thought we'd lost that one. So he's got this extraordinary list with all these people in it, all these amazing names in it. And I sort of said, I'd like to do this. And he said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And it sort of sat in his inbox for a while. And then one of the people who works for him got hold of it and did an amazing, the most thorough piece of editing I've received from a publisher, I think, ever. I've published about 40 books. I've never had an editor actually fact-checking things like that. And they did me proud. And they said, well, let's not just do the Tribune stuff, because there's an awful lot of other stuff here as well. And they were trawling through the internet and finding things I completely forgotten I'd written. And said, yeah, let's get it out there. And they filled it. Well, we worked together on filling it. Each piece has an accompanying cartoon from across the last more than 42 years, 45 years of work I've done, of the something like 16,000 images I've produced over the past 45 years.
And it's very immediate writing, because you're writing about what is now political history. So it's really very interesting to remember those details about people who have, who are not around anymore or are doing different things, and just sort of political rows that you forget about after a few years. You've kind of awakened them. And also, analogous to getting that perfect image, there are very good kind of pen portraits. I looked at Alistair Campbell, for example, where you don't just do a little pen portrait, you kind of dig a bit deeper and say, this is what I think is going on in his head. Another piece that struck me was when you wrote about the Gay Hussar, and that's the place we used to go. Sort of strange, indifferent food, rather good wine, but just
the wine towards the end. I mean, when the place closed, it was just for those who don't know, the Gay Hussar was this Hungarian restaurant in Greek Street, set up by a man called Victor Sassi, who was born on the Isle of Man, and he may have had Hungarian parentage at some point, but not really. And he'd been to the Dry Hussaren in Vienna after the war, and he tried to set up this Hungarian restaurant in imitation of it. And it bore little resemblance to any kind of Hungarian cuisine, but it was the place where the left decided to meet together, and journalists and politicians would meet there and conspire and eat Central European stodge and drink bull's blood. And it's said during the 1960s, the whole of Harold Wilson's cabinet would go there for lunch, and Sassi would have to seat them in certain places so they couldn't overhear each other conspiring against each other. And famously, Tom Dryburgh, the fallationist Labour MP, tried to persuade Mick Jagger to stand as a Labour MP up in what I dubbed the Tom Dryburgh Memorial Suite, which was the private restaurant at the top of the restaurant, at the top of the building. And he blew it when he started fondling Mick's knee. So
he didn't blow anything.
He didn't blow it. Yeah. He blew the deal. And I remember when it closed. They threatened it with closure in 2013, and we set up the Goulash Cooperative, where we raised about 300,000 quid in about a fortnight. This is a bunch of old lefties, and thank God we failed to get the tenancy. Thank God, we would have bankrupted ourselves within 3 months. And it's now run by the wonderful Noble Rot, fantastic restaurant.
Oh.
The food and the drink is infinitely better. But I remember the last night, Midsummer's Night 2018 was the last night of the Gay Hussar, and it was like a much beloved alcoholic great aunt dying. You missed her, but you knew her time had come. And I remember waking up thinking, thank God, this is the last sulphide hangover I'm going to have from the Gay Hussar. And the wines were exquisitely vile. It was just so horrible. But,
I remember the sour cherry. There was sour cherry soup or something.
Which was basically ski yogurt.
Exactly. It was ski black cherry yogurt watered down. And the most brilliant thing to do would be to take somebody unsuspecting
Yeah.
and get them to order it, and then just watch their face as they ate it. You know, we all went through that, didn't we?
We did. And I remember we had a heroically long lunch there once with my then teenage daughter and the reviewer Tim Martin.
Ah, did we now?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, where we bought our daughter Rose, not our daughter, my daughter Rose, who'd just been for some orthodontic work, and she was in a bit of pain, so we bought her one of the house cocktails, which cheered her up no end. Yes. I think she was like 15 at the time. She had fun.
Yeah, and you know, you have modestly admitted to mention that your own artwork lavishly adorned the walls. So presumably this it became a tradition. But how did the tradition start?
Well, again, this links in with Tribune. So with the As I Please columns, the editor of Tribune, Mark Seddon, had taken to organising Tribune dinners up in the Tom Dryburgh Memorial Suite. And they would invite famous people. So we had people like the last Lord Rothermere, who owned the Daily Mail but crossed the floor of the House of Lords to join the Labour benches in 1998. Weirdly enough, something people have everybody's forgotten about. And all sorts of weird people. After one of these, I was coming out and I said to John Robel, the manager, you know, I would like to draw your celebrity patrons and I would like them to be hung on the wall. The ownership of the drawings was never made clear. There was never any contract. I never got paid for it. I got a free meal, and I encountered some amazing things, some extraordinary things. I drew Lord Longford, and I took about 45 minutes to do the drawing. I didn't make any sketches beforehand. I just sat down in one dark corner of this restaurant and drew these people during the course of their lunch times, with waiters moving backwards and forwards, them moving all the time. And when I presented Longford with for him to draw as a true record of himself during the course of his lunch, he said, "Oh, this is like mortification of the flesh. Who could ever love somebody as ugly as that?" And I said, "I'm sorry, my lord, I draw what I see." And he was not alone. There were all sorts of people I drew. I mean, half of Blair's cabinet, Alistair Campbell, who famously said, "This is a nice picture of Jeremy Paxman. Where the fuck is the one of me?" Because he was trying to diffuse the bad magic, saying, "You have not drawn me. You have not captured my soul. Don't do that." Or as I was remembering yesterday, I had lunch with some old lefties, some of the people who set up this co-op with me, which thankfully failed. When I was meant to be drawing Brian Walden, who was a former Labour MP, used to present Weekend World, which older viewers may remember. And he was in there. I drew him, and then I saw sitting up the Bonquette, the industrial correspondent for I think he was then working for the Independent, but then no, he was working for the Mirror again by then, Paul Routledge, a man of whom it was said, his face looks like it caught fire and somebody put it out with a shovel. Lovely man, Paul, very fond of Paul. And he was having lunch with Jonathan Lloyd, who was the head of Curtis Brown, who was his agent. And Jonathan Lloyd had just been giving evidence as a character witness against Jeffrey Archer's sentencing for perjury, to say they shouldn't have given him such a long sentence. And I just saw Routledge. I thought, I've got to draw him. I'm not equipped with the palette of J.W.M. Turner, which I should be, to capture those hues, but I'll draw him anyway. And then they say, come and join us now, and have a drink. And I noticed they were drinking the rabbinical Slivovitz, which they served in the Gay Hussar, which is Slivovitz blessed by the chief rabbi of Budapest, which I had twice in the 25 years I used to go there. And on both occasions, I had no memory of anything I did in the next 3 hours. So I didn't think any of that. While they were knocking this stuff back, and Lloyd went into this bizarre rant about the injustice that had been brought upon his client, Jeffrey Archer. There was another woman from the agency there, said, "You never had to go on book tour with him. He should be in prison for life." Which I thought, but he then sort of ranting about this, it's worse than the Dreyfus trial kind of thing. And this was back in the day when you could smoke in restaurants. And he went to draw on his cigarette as a rhetorical flourish at the end of making his point about how this is the greatest injustice since the Dreyfus trial. and did something I've never seen before or since, which was miss his head. And that's why this is
sort of
like Dr. Strangelove. I mean, it's so weird. And then Routledge stood up and said, "Oh, I've got to write 300 words on Prime Minister's Question Time for fucking Daily Mirror. I'm saying the fucker, but I'm a professional." And fell sideways out of the restaurant. And wrote it. I bought the paper the next day. He was a professional. He could do that kind of thing. So it was a crazy place. But I couldn't have carried on going there. I mean, in the last couple of years, I went there hardly at all because a lunchtime would probably last for 2 or 3 days. It was part of the grand old legendary world of old Soho, which is now disappeared more or less.
We can't do it anymore, can we? We can't.
We can't do. No, I occasionally see people who are still serving their apprenticeships as Soho flâneurs. You see people very slightly who are having a fag outside the French and knocking back a Pernod at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you think, well, you can't ever do anything else apart from this. And is this skill bankable? Will you be able to keep? Geoffrey Bernard did not enjoy an old age in any way whatsoever, but he certainly never had any money. So is it actually even worth doing this? That somebody someday might write a book about the new legends of Soho? Well, probably not, because you'll have destroyed your life, you'll have destroyed any relationships you had, you'll have destroyed your health, and there's better things to do.
Well, I remember I had a look. Well, I probably don't remember much actually, but I did have a lunch with you, and I sort of got myself home sort of quite pissed. And my then partner was saying, "This is terrible. Look at the state of you. This is a disgrace. How did you get into this state? This is awful. It's appalling." And I went, "It's only 8 o'clock." And he went, "You were at lunch."
Yeah. Well, this was in the days of publishers. I remember publishing friends of mine who would talk with hushed reverence and awe about how they'd had lunch with one of the famous names of publishing who'd come over from New York, and at 7 o'clock in the evening they'd ordered some more food. They just stayed in the same room for about 12 hours. But
that was a time out thing as well. Stay there so long that you call for the menu again at about 7 p.m. We didn't do it all the time. I mean, sometimes people talk as if, I did manage to get books pages out at considerable length every week.
I mean, if you think about it, 40, 50, 60 years ago, the entire country was run by people who were permanently pissed. This includes surgeons and things like that. Remember, the whole selling point of the TV programme MASH was that these two surgeons, who were the most brilliant surgeons in the Korean theatre of war, were actually drinking martinis for breakfast, and they distilled the gin themselves. So it was just assumed that booze was a part of it all, and certainly in journalism, it was absolutely fueled by booze. And people don't do it anymore. And it's probably just as well.
Well, for all our sakes. But
it was just one thing at that wonderful moment in one of the first couple of series of Ed Reardon's Week, when Ed Reardon's gone to have lunch with his agent, who was played by the late John Fortune, rather wonderfully. And the waiter comes along and says, Giovanni, can we have 2 more bottles of the Merlot? And I suppose we better look at the menu now. And that sums it up.
That sums it up. It's been great fun going down memory lane. We haven't really talked much about the Dunciad. I just like saying that word. But it is a wonderful riff on Alexander Pope, filthy and scatological. That's the right word, isn't it? Is that the right word? Yes.
Yeah, it's the scatological muse which inspired the greats of the 18th century. So it's I've always been a big fan of the 18th century because it was so weird, and it was completely sort of obliterated. The sensibility that informed them, which was brutal but sentimental as well, was then obliterated by Victorian prudishness and sentimentality. It's a sort of different.
Well, I think the Romantics came in, didn't they?
Yeah.
And said, well, we're not going to have these rigid couplets. I mean, they could do a rigid couplet if they wanted to, but
was very good at a rigid couplet.
Yeah. He was good at all sorts of rigid things, but especially couplets.
But it's like I always say, there's a difference between Hogarth's Gin Lane, which is one of the emblematic images of not only the 18th century but also of London and the development of London. And it was in the old rookeries, in the St. Giles rookeries. And it's 80 years apart and probably about half a mile away from Fagin's kitchen in Oliver Twist. And in Oliver Twist, you have hope. There is hope. There is hope. It may turn out your granddad was very rich and you can be rescued from this horror. But there is hope dashed, so Nancy gets murdered. And so you cry tears of sentimentality. But in Gin Lane, there is no hope of any kind whatsoever, because it's just filled with images of violence and despair, which are actually very funny. And because there is no hope, and even the central image of the baby being dropped by the pissed up mother is a pastiche of the Madonna and Child, where the Redeemer is being dropped to his death in infancy. So there's no hope of any kind of redemption. So the only thing you can do is laugh. And that is at the heart of all satire. When you stare at things that are so appalling, the only thing you can do is laugh, because otherwise we would go mad with horror.
Yes, a point that I believe is made in the Dunciad.
Yeah.
You know, the dogs and the ghosts and all of that. This is the point that is made. So it's wonderful. I would say it repays many rereadings. Intertextuality and all that, and just very funny and very clever. Good rhymes. I am now going to wind up with my 3 questions for you.
Which I've now completely forgotten what they were.
All right. Well, I'll remind you. So the first one is favourite artwork.
So many to choose from.
I know it's hard for you. Yeah.
So it's either Gin Lane, which I think is just so important in the history of design, the history of journalism, the history of satire, the history of Britain, or The Scapegoat by William Holman Hunt, which is
creepy.
I've used over and over again. I've pastiched it over and over again. It's so wonderful. And
you like the colours, don't you?
Yeah,
I think I've seen the
colours of the sky in the background are fantastic. It is one of the most preposterous paintings ever submitted to canvas. The circumstances in which he painted it, the fact that nobody understood what it was about, that when he took it to his art dealer, he showed it to him, and his art dealer was French and said, "What's this? Don't understand." And the art dealer's English wife was sitting in the broom, the carriage outside, so she was summoned in, and she looked and said, "Oh, Mr. Holman Hunt, a sheep, how lovely. Are you going to put a flock in?" And he said, "It's about the Bible. Why don't you understand?" But I just think that there's something about it which is mesmerically bad, which actually makes it brilliant. So there you go.
Somebody, one of the pre-Raphaelites, similar kind of era, did the most preposterous massacre of the innocents. The children killed by Herod, where they're just like. Holman Hunt, I mean, he really had something, didn't he? Like a very odd painter indeed.
Yeah, they're dancing around the Holy Family in bubbles.
Yes.
Utterly bonkers.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very good one. The second one is your book of shame. What have you not read that we might be surprised by?
Well, you know what? You could fill 1 million libraries for 1 million years with 1 million books that I haven't read. I haven't really read the Dunciad. I haven't. Dipped into it, but after a while you just think, I don't give a shit who these people are. I don't understand this footnote. It's actually too hard work. So right at the moment, that is the one I should be ashamed of.
Right.
Admitting that I read.
And then I know you have fallen foul of the great and good with your limbing pen. So I was wondering, what is the funniest or most bizarre feedback you've ever had on your work?
Well, you know, it never stops. It's the death threats, lots and lots of death threats. I don't know why people are so keen to kill me because I've done a drawing of the object of their veneration, whether it's a politician or a god that they get so upset about that they think I should die. But they do. They genuinely do think I should die. As I always said, death threats don't count unless you get one of your children's ears in an envelope sent to your home address. But, you know, otherwise they can, you know, fuck them. But yeah, I thought about this, and I think one of the weirdest ones was in the endless cavalcade of whinging and whining and complaint and misunderstanding, and, you know, the schizophrenics who send you 15 pages of closely argued, almost illegible biro-written screed explaining how they have featured in your cartoon and they know where you live and what you look like. They describe you, and it's nothing like you. And you think, you know, somebody should have filtered this. That happened through Time Out. Somebody should have not sent me the letter. They should have just not sent it to me. So they should not have sent it on. But it was when I did do you remember back in the day, 1998, when the late Derek Draper, who actually I knew quite well. I liked Derek. We disagreed about almost everything, but I liked him, and I thought he was very courageous when talking about his mental health. And he had a miserable end, dying of long COVID. And after he died, I remember, you know, his footnote in British history was Lobbygate, when he claimed he could get access to Peter Mandelson, who was then the Minister without Portfolio, any minute of the day by fax. And I did a cartoon of Blair as the ancient mariner on the deck of a ship with this Mandelson albatross hanging round his neck. And hanging round his neck was the man whose name I can't remember, who was Draper's boss, Roger somebody or other, who was an albatross hanging round Mandelson's neck. And Derek had been cut free, so he was just lying on the deck as an albatross who'd been cut through because they'd sacked him. And there was a fax machine saying, faxes from the office of the Minister without Portfolio. No faxes have been sent to or from this machine. The Pope is Catholic. The Blairs shit in the woods. It was just a stupid pun. And the writing was so tiny you could hardly read it. It was just a little joke for my own amusement. They ran it, they didn't complain. Somebody took me to the Press Complaints Commission.
On what grounds? On
the grounds that this was a gross intrusion into the privacy of the Blair family. Because it was none of my business whether they shat in the woods or not. And how dare I? If they wanted to shit in the woods, that was up to them. And it's got to the press conference. It actually got to a tribunal where it was dismissed. The complaint was dismissed.
Wow.
But
wow.
I think that's the most barkingly crazy one. So,
yeah.
But there've been so many. I just wonder, well, if I'm ever really, really bored, I'll just try and compile them all and then burn as a ritual at midnight as a cloud passes in front of the moon and weird howl in the distance. You know?
Yes. Well, yes, you've let us into your spooky trade. I love the idea of the magic of capturing the image perfectly. These souls are yours in perpetuity, I feel. You know, they can put cartoons up in their toilet as much as they like. You have possessed them. What was that? Yes, you've kind of... I'm not even going to do an image, but yes, we haven't sworn very much at all, really.
No, we haven't. No, I said you have. You know, you've got them when you have your hand up their soul.
That's
which is not swearing. It's nice, clean. You know, it's a soul.
No,
it's when I drew Campbell in The Gay Hussar, it was quite clear that he got entirely what was going on because he hated it. He hated every single second of me drawing it because he knew I was doing something. You know, like he was a Tobriand Islander and I was taking his photograph. There was something very fishy because he was losing control because I was taking him and I was shape-shifting him and exaggerating his features through caricature, this kind of thing. And at one point, the restaurant was really crowded that day. And you remember how small it was. So, so people could quite clearly hear him shouting across the restaurant, "You just won't be able to stop yourself from making me look like a really bad person." which I by Alistair, I draw what I see. And
Yes.
he's not like a really bad person. He's all right. I like Alistair.
Yes.
He was good. He was good at his job. A deeply flawed man, but that's actually to his credit, I think.
Yes. Well, you've also drawn me, never very flatteringly. And I remember you did my leaving card, and I was unfortunate enough to leave at the same time as two very beautiful young women who had had their pictures taken many times. So their cards were sort of full of pictures of them looking lovely. And then everybody unveiled, ta-da, a large...
Sorry,
Martin
Suzi.
Rowson cartoon, which I then took home, and my then partner gazed at it for several moments in silence and then went, "Oh, that's not good." But you know, you draw what you see.
It's a cartoon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not a bleeding photograph.
Yeah, well, I don't think the photographs are any better, to be quite honest. But yes, all in fun. I think I was adorned with books. I think they were in my hair, they were around my neck, they were hanging from my ears. You know, you can't argue with that.
All in fun, as I think I say in the untsiad, or the Dunciad, if you prefer. Something about how at the next war crimes tribunals, if anybody tries out the Bantz defence.
Yes.
Which they did not do at Nuremberg, but they probably will at the next ones. Well, can't you take a joke? What's the matter? Bants, innit? Bants.
Well, we've had bants for the last hour or so. We've had bants, we've had reminiscence.
Yeah.
Long may we continue. And you're probably on a deadline. You've probably got a cartoon to do right now. No,
I have a couple of things I need to draw this afternoon, but there's no rush. Otherwise, I'm putting up this time limits. I'm putting up the Christmas decorations.
Oh yes,
because round here we're like Mr. Scrooge was at the end. We always celebrate Christmas. We're hardline atheists, but we love Christmas.
Yes. In the good old fashion, I can't remember quite what the quote is, but he knew how to keep Christmas, did Mr. Scrooge. Something like that. God bless us, everyone.
God bless us, everyone. Yeah.
Farewell, Martin Rowson. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining me in my book bag.
It's been a joy. Thanks, Suzi.
Bye-bye, and thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. We have been discussing the Dunciad. It's very 18th century, beautiful couplets. He's snorting away in the background. Bless you, Martin. Join me next time, probably next year now, 2025 coming up. I do hope you'll continue to watch the book bag. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.